1. Some background. Parts of this memory were quite vague, but writing it down has brought back a lot. Also, I had an insanely good memory as a child and teen. This story occurred in the Netherlands about 18 years ago when I was 15. Mobile phones and sat-nav weren't common yet, but that year inline skating had become popular. I would skate almost every day, usually the same 4-mile circle. In the middle of my usual route was a small bridge, a few hundred yards away from one of the 5 houses on my route. It was an isolated farmhouse, the only house inbound for at least 2 miles in any direction. That is remote from my rather urbanized area. The 4 other houses belonged to my parents and our neighbors who lived relatively close by. This is not a story about a creepy old farmhouse. I had spoken to the lady who lived there once a few years before, and she was very kind, and probably said hello to the family countless times. It's a place where people greet anyone they meet, also strangers. There aren't that many people around anyway. It was a very safe area. The doctor was shot in the Second World War and one family was deported to Auschwitz. 2 of the most notable things ever to happen in a few centuries, and still sometimes mentioned by my grandmother over 60 years later. The area is also deeply religious, so things like kids smoking cigarettes and kicking over trash cans was generally the highest form of cool rebellion, or nuisance depending on which side you stood. Nowadays there is a thriving drug scene which again causes little trouble. The area really is exceptionally dull. I grew up there, so I was used to the slow, quiet life, and rarely felt unsafe. Also, I considered myself to be ugly, fat, and stupid, and truly expected no one would ever show me any interest, which again created a sense of safety, I suppose. I did not grow up in a happy home. I moved as soon as I could and think far better of myself now. It was a summer day. On hot days like these, I would rest midway through my route on the bridge I mentioned, in view of the farmhouse. I was sitting there on the guardrail when a silver car drove past me, stopped about 200 yards ahead, and reversed all the way back to me. The window smoothly rolled down to reveal a man, probably in his late 50s. He was somewhat overweight and had grey hair, but he was probably not unattractive for his age. He said nothing. He just stared at me quietly, our faces no more than a few feet apart. I had never seen him before. His gaze made me very uncomfortable, and to break the tension I asked if he was looking for directions. I was stopped regularly by people looking for directions. Bumfuck nowhere confuses people here. Not seeing houses and street signs make them doubt they are going anywhere. But he said no, and asked where I lived. I pointed to the nearest house, just over there, not trusting him at all. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "Just enjoying the sun. I just skated around for a bit and I'm tired," I babbled nervously. Then he asked if I wanted to go for a drive with him. He could take me home. I said no. "It's very close," again, gesturing to the farm. His car had me almost pinned to the bridge. He kept looking at me, and I tried not to show my discomfort. He asked me more questions, most of which I don't remember now, like how old I was, what my father did, etc., and I kept babbling, making sure not to give any real information, frantically thinking of ways to get out. I remember thinking I couldn't just get up and walk away. I was afraid that if I displeased him, he would get out of the car. He would certainly be faster than me on my skates on uneven ground, and if he opened his door, he would have me pinned completely, or knock me into the water. I considered jumping into the water. I was a strong swimmer, but I had no idea how deep it was. Probably quite shallow, so I could get stuck. I thought my only hope was another car or maybe a cyclist passing, so I could wave them over, or maybe someone from the farm would come outside. I kept an eye out, but there was no one around. He tried to keep me in conversation with more questions. I saw no other option than announcing my departure and just doing it. He asked if I was sure I didn't want to go for a drive with him, and again I refused, half laughing nervously to hide my fear. I reiterated that I was leaving, and he again pushed for me to get into the car with him. Just do it. With some difficulty, I rejected the offer again. Being accommodating and obedient had been pounded into me from a young age, so I felt the push of being a complying good girl. "Leave now," I said to myself. It's not going to get better, but it will get worse. Just get to the farmhouse, you will be safe there, I thought. I stepped off the guardrail as smoothly as possible into the narrow space between the rail and the car. I did not want to show a lack of purpose or instability, not give him any reason to think he could try anything. Inline skates are quite stable in motion. Perhaps even more so for the Dutch. We are a nation of cyclists and ice skaters. But not when trotting on uneven ground, especially with some pebbles strewn about. I moved past his car as quickly as possible, holding onto the guardrail. And when I was about to get past him, he rolled the car forward. Just a yard. I told myself it was a mistake, an accident. He had just meant to drive off. Simple miscommunication. Basically saying this to keep myself from freaking out. I looked back and he just sat there smiling. So I kept clumsily walking. Again, one step before I could get in front of the car, he rolled forward. I did not look back again and walked on, letting go of the rail and getting into the grass growing on an incline down to the canal. He made sure I could not get onto the road. This may surprise you, but it was an easier surface. I made some more speed, and again he rolled his car forward just in time to prevent my escape, now slowly keeping pace with my progress. There was no point trying to get in front of him again. It wouldn't be safe anyway, and I was getting angry. I took one more step forward and then quickly turned around, ran the other way, the wheels of my skates gripping in the grass. I avoided eye contact but saw his surprised expression. I skated as fast as I could away from the safety of the farmhouse, as fast as my legs would carry me. 2 miles without another soul around, fully unprotected, until I got to my own house. Not looking back for the first half-mile to see if he was in pursuit. When I got home, my mom saw I was upset and we called the police. They refused to make a report. I didn't get the number plate, and really nothing had happened to me, right? A day later, some 70 miles away, a 16-year-old girl was dragged into a car. She didn't make it out alive. Probably another man. I don't really know. I still get anxious when cars drive slowly next to me, and try to get the number plate. If you are still out there, old creep, I wish you a slow and painful death. 2. I had to learn the hard way that not all companies do a complete background check on new employees. About 10 years ago, I was working at a group home for 5 high-functioning mentally disabled gentlemen. Each of the men are assigned direct care staff to help out with everyday life outside of work, and when they are at home in the evenings. The men ranged from a little over 21 to early 50s. These men are unable to properly feed themselves or live a normal life outside of assistance. Only one of the younger men, Doug, needed assistance with the shower since he was the lowest functioning. Tommy was a short, hairy, squat man in his late 30s, with inappropriate comments to female direct care staff. Walter was in his early 40s, had the tendency to lie, a touch of a rare temper, and enjoyed winding up the other clients. Rick chain-smoked like a demon, lied a lot, and had a small temper too. Then there is Roland, over 6.5 feet tall, gangly, violent toward all females, and known to tear out hair. Each of the gentlemen have their own bedrooms, for those curious. 3 years into the job, a guy named Corey was hired. We all discovered he had a sick wife at home, and he seemed pretty nice. I did nothing to encourage him, but it wasn't long before Corey was trying to keep our clients in the same room to talk to me. I got the creeps, then asked for an opposite schedule to his own. He still worked shifts with me despite the request. Then he started stalking me to the grocery store that turned out to be near his apartment. After a few days of his being there after our shifts ended, I was wigged out. One evening he followed me home complete before I had realized he had. I reported the incidents, and it wasn't taken seriously. I bleached my hair to a pale white the day before a huge meeting for work, plus kept my head down. I had told Allie, plus another caseworker, about it, but was believed by them because the idiot was asking where I was at the meeting. He finally spots me, tries to engage in convo after the meeting, and I told the assistant manager. He brushes it off until Allie told him about how Corey just followed me to the van with Rick, even though Corey wasn't on duty. Corey was immediately pulled aside and explicitly told to leave me alone. Thankfully, they started listening. But it was too late in many ways. Corey's behavior toward me pressed the managers to look further into his past. It was discovered that the year prior he did time for raping a 17-year-old girl. To make matters worse, he had been corrupting the clients during trusted graveyard shifts in the house for months. He subjected Roland, Rick, and Walter to some hardcore pornography. He was fired shortly after. Last I knew, he was on the loose. He lives a state away, but I wish there was more distance. Roland became more violent with female direct care staff after the exposure, and began to corner me after the pornography exposure from Corey. This led to me barely getting into the bathroom before Roland was able to tear at my long hair. I had to climb out the window, demanded the assigned staff get their client, and put in my notice the next day. 3. I was around 8 or 9 at the time of this. I'm female and as a young kid was very outgoing. I was the kid who walked by you at the store to wave and smile at you no matter who you were. Me and my mother were at the store looking for fruit around the time of the 4th of July. We had people coming over, and my mom had a thing for having fruit for everyone. We were walking down the cooler for fruit. She had been asking what kind I wanted, knowing I was very picky when it came to the fruit that I liked. But as she asked, I wasn't paying much attention to her. There was a lady, around 30 looking, I guess. The lady kept walking up and down our part of the cooler, and kept looking at me and smiling and waving at me. And as for me, I just stared at her. For some reason, this lady made me feel bad, like something in the pit of my stomach. My mom was still just looking at the fruit, as if nothing was going on. And as I looked at the lady again, I really just looked at her. As in, what was she wearing and such? She had on a tight pink shirt and was overweight, and she was wearing leggings with holes from too much use. As she whisked past us, again I got a strong whiff of her and shuddered. I remember so clearly now what she smelled like, even now several years later. I remember thinking she smelled of hard-boiled eggs and rotting milk. And again, as she passed at me, she waved and smiled again, but I remember her looking mad as I stepped a little closer to my mom when she passed us. Then, for the first time since I had saw her, she actually stopped a few feet away from where we were standing. Looking at this now, I realized that this all happened within about 5 minutes, but when it happened, it felt like forever. The lady walked up to me and bent down slightly as if to get down to my level. And this is the part where it gets slightly blurry. It was either before or after my mother had asked what she was doing, that the lady had grabbed my arm tightly and started pulling away, but my mother was having none of that, and she practically jumped on me to keep the woman pulling me away further. But the second my mother pounced, she let go of me, and just looked disappointed and walked off, not even grabbing her cart. My mother started asking me a million questions all at once, but realized after I really was okay, once she had composed herself enough. We kept walking through the store to complete our outing of the day, and as far as I remember, she never told anyone who worked there, and I never saw that woman again. 4. Throughout my life, I always had strange dreams that consist of prediction. The typical people, places, occasionally death. Every once in a while a family member will tell me about a dream they had about me, always random, and mostly some kind of spiritual phenomenal level. For example, my sister lived with me for some time, and would have a repeated dream for weeks at a time. Her dream began with her walking in a very white hallway. She said she was lost and scared but kept moving forward down the hallway. She suddenly felt as if someone was watching her. She turned to look behind her. The hallway was filled with black smoke, red mist, fire, and the smell of sulfur. She said in the mix of all this, she saw 2 eyes, and she took off running as fast as she could. She could hear noises and felt pure evil behind her, close enough to feel the heat. She got to the end of the hallway, which led to 2 double doors, what you may see in a hospital. She slammed her body into the door and ran through the other side, straight smack into someone carrying bins. Plastic container boxes, wearing a lab coat. She said the moment she looked up and realized it was me. Then everything stopped. I looked into the direction she was running from, and there stood the devil, horns, hooves, and all. She said we just kept eye contact, and he simply disappeared. After I blinked a few times, I just started collecting my bins. She asked, "What did you do?" She said I just tilted my head, and She noticed something was different, but could not say what. This dream affected her more than me. I have more curiosity than fear, yet I had no reaction to her dream, and still don't, to be honest. But seeing how this dream occurred more than any normal random dream, I wondered, was it just a dream? We are not close at all. Most people don't know we are related since we are the complete opposite of each other. She is a proud, racist Trump supporter, a true cunt to other racists, even her own, and religions. Where I am more of a free spirit, human rights advocate. Her dream was a few years ago, and I currently work in a lab, with the typical lab coat, and we do use plastic bins. Was this a foreshadow of some kind? My brother joked it's a sign of my lineage to the dark side, while other family members think it's something worse. The closest I ever dreamt of any demon was over 15 years ago, when a cat-like creature, similar to the Dobby character from the Harry Potter series, warned me of the darkness coming into my life. It was not scary, more annoying. I dislike cryptic messages of any kind. But recently, I had another unusual dream. I dreamt I woke up in a medical room. It was very bright. There was a few greys and a woman. She seemed familiar to me, but I could not place her. She gave me a friendly smile, and I said, "Whatever happens, I don't want to feel anything." She stepped forward, and in a blink, we were in a corridor. She held this metallic object that reminded me of an iPad, but was as thick as a literature book. She showed me pictures of people I had built bonds with, and asked me about my connections of love and friendship. I explained my ability to categorize my feelings and thoughts, as well as how I feel when I see someone I have feelings for. At that moment, we were almost knocked over by someone running at full speed. To my surprise, it was someone I knew, someone I had feelings for since we first met. We watched as he tried to open the door at the end of the corridor. He glanced at our direction, and continued his struggle. As we stood there watching him, she said to me, "He doesn't seem to see you. How does that make you feel?" I responded, "He never has or will. You must release him, he won't stop fighting you. It is he who is a soldier." She tapped her iPad, and a divider separated us from him. She turned and I followed. We walked down the corridor. She continued showing me images in silence. The corridor seemed to go on forever. I asked her to stop walking. I was barefoot and my back began to hurt due to injury. She smiled and said, "We can help you with that." She led me down another corridor and led me to the center of the room. Within the floor was a massive hollow cylinder. Looking down, it seemed to be endless. I could hear distant shouts and screams, but had no source of direction. We got closer to the edge, and she told me not to resist. I closed my eyes as I felt a soft pull lifting me up and lowering me down the cylinder. I seemed to float and turn, trying my best not to resist. My body turned and rolled until I was moved into a fetal position. I felt a device being placed at the tailbone of my spine. As it slowly moved up my spine, I felt a magnetic pull separating my vertebrae one by one. Each vertebra felt as if it was removed and replaced. I felt no pain until the device touched the bottom of my skull. The pain was unbearable. It caused me to sit up in an instant, only to find myself in my bedroom. The back of my head felt sore for a few days, but my back pain was gone. Completely gone. I had been dealing with back issues since I was hit by a car. That should have killed me. The EMTs and doctors said it was unbelievable I survived, so I had months of being unable to walk, run, or sit without pain. I visited pain relief centers for acupuncture, chiropractor's treatment, and multiple drug relief, with no effects. Prior to this dream, I had an appointment for an X-ray for spine damage. My doctor called me and informed me there's no sign of any damage, no fractures, no bone bruising, no sign I was in any accident. Part of me wants to believe this was just a dream, but a bigger part of me wonders if it was much more. 5. Back in 2000 or so, I was a 20-ish female, and worked for Horizon Airline in Boise, Idaho. A Sun Valley flight had been diverted to Boise for some reason or another. One of the passengers' bags didn't make it, a set of golf clubs for a tournament the following morning. I volunteered to drive the bag to him once it arrived, much later in the evening. Since it was so late, I asked a friend to accompany me so I didn't fall asleep. We arrived in Sun Valley around 2 a.m. and tried to find the address. We found the road, but it ended blocks before the right address. So we figured the street starts up again in a few blocks, an incredibly stupid thing that is common in Idaho, and tried to find our way to the missing road. Around this time, a red pickup truck with one headlight starts following us. We didn't think much of it and continued making strange turns here and there to find the missing road. The truck followed our convoluted path for a couple of miles. We started getting nervous and decided to try to evade them. We sped around a couple blocks and dipped into an apartment complex, killed the lights, ducked into a spot, and turned off the motor. A couple minutes later, the truck started cruising the complex slowly. It drove right by us. We held our breath, but they kept moving. We watched it cruise through the rest of the parking lot and back out onto the street. They turned left, so we decided we would go back the way we had come in and turn right. As we turned, we noticed a couple cop cars pulled off to the side of the road, so decided to ask them for directions. We still had the bag to deliver after all. The cops took the paper and went to look it up. Turns out we were in the wrong town and needed to drive another 5 miles or so. At this point, lights started filling my rear-view mirror, and we were shocked to see the red truck pulled up right behind us while we were talking to police officers. We quickly told the officers this truck had been following us and was scaring us, and could they do something about it, maybe pull them over for the headlight. He just said, "Oh, they're just a couple local punks," and he waved them off. "Thanks, officer, I feel so much better now." Fortunately, that was the last we saw of the red truck. But it was pretty off-putting that those officers weren't worried about a couple of local punks following young women around in the middle of the night. We delivered the golf clubs and got the hell out of Sun Valley and away from their crappy police force. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Scary Subscriber Stories, episode 70. And thank you very much to everybody who sent in stories for use in this video. If you yourself have a story you'd like to send in, doesn't have to be a scary story, it could be from any of the genres I do, or even if you have a story you'd just like to tell, please do send it in, I'm sure I'll find a home for it somewhere. And you can send those to kingofthecities@gmail.com, which you can find in the description of this video and pretty much every video actually. Okay, and with that I'm going to head off for now. Give the old voice a rest. Try not to sing too loudly when I'm relaxing later. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.